You walk into a room feeling perfectly fine, maybe even good, and within minutes, something shifts. Your chest tightens, your thoughts start to race. A heaviness settles in that wasn't there before. You can't name it exactly, but you feel different, changed, and you have no idea why. Or maybe it's subtler than that. You spend an hour with a friend who's anxious, and by the time you leave, their worry has become yours. You sit next to a coworker who's frustrated, and suddenly you're irritated at things that didn't bother you this morning. You scroll through a tense conversation online, and your body responds as if the conflict is happening to you. The confusing part is that none of these feelings started in you. They don't match your life, your circumstances, or even your thoughts, but they're real. They're in your body, and they exhaust you. If this sounds familiar, you're not imagining it, and you're not broken. What you're experiencing is emotional absorption, the unconscious process of taking on the emotional states of the people around you. It's not the same as caring about someone or being affected by their story. It's deeper and more automatic than that. It's when the boundary between your emotions and someone else's becomes so thin that you lose track of where you end and they begin. Some people can walk through the world without this happening. They can sit with someone who's upset and feel concern without feeling upset themselves. They can be in a room full of tension and remain steady. They can care deeply without carrying everything. But for others, for you, it doesn't work that way. Your system is more porous, more receptive. You pick up on emotional shifts the way some people notice changes in temperature. It's not a choice. It's how you're wired. And it's exhausting. Because when you absorb other people's emotions, you're not just feeling more, you're losing access to yourself. You stop knowing what you actually feel, what you actually want, what's actually true for you. You become a mirror for everyone else's inner life, and your own gets crowded out. The worst part is that most people don't understand this. They tell you to toughen up, to stop being so sensitive, to just not care so much. But you've probably already tried that, and it didn't work, because this isn't about caring too much. It's about a nervous system that's picking up signals you didn't ask to receive. This book is not going to tell you to stop being sensitive. It's not going to teach you how to shut down, harden up, or build walls around your heart. That approach doesn't work, and more importantly, it asks you to betray something essential about who you are. Instead, this book is going to show you how to stay sensitive and stay yourself at the same time. It's going to help you understand why emotional absorption happens in the first place, so you can stop blaming yourself for something that was never a character flaw. It's going to teach you the difference between healthy empathy and emotional fusion, so you can connect with people without losing yourself in the process. And it's going to give you practical, gentle tools for separating your emotions from other people's emotions, in real time, in everyday life, without drama or withdrawal. You'll learn how to notice when absorption is starting to happen, how to ground yourself during interactions so you don't leave feeling drained or destabilized, how to clear your system afterward so emotions don't linger and weigh you down, and most importantly, how to rebuild a stable emotional center, a sense of self that stays with you even when the people around you are struggling. This is not about becoming less caring. It's about becoming more present. It's about learning to feel with people instead of becoming them. It's about reclaiming your own emotional space so you can actually show up for others in a way that's sustainable and real. I want to be clear about what this book won't do. It won't diagnose you, it won't pathologize your sensitivity or treat it as something to fix. It won't offer medical advice or tell you what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. What this book will do is meet you exactly where you are, tired, confused, and probably a little skeptical that anything could actually help. It will move slowly. It will speak plainly. It will offer you tools that feel doable, not overwhelming. and it will trust that you already have everything you need to find your way back to yourself. This is not a quick fix. Emotional boundaries aren't something you master in a weekend. They're something you practice over time with patience and self-compassion. Some days will feel easier than others. Some interactions will still knock you off center. That's normal. That's part of being human. But what will change is this. You'll start to recognize when you're absorbing something that isn't yours. You'll have a way to come back to yourself instead of staying lost in someone else's emotional weather. And over time, you'll build a quiet, steady sense of your own emotional ground, a place inside you that doesn't shift every time someone else's mood changes. You'll still feel deeply, you'll still care, you'll still be moved by the people you love, but you won't disappear in the process. That's the promise of this work. Not that you'll stop being sensitive, but that you'll stop losing yourself because of it. So if you're reading this because you're tired of feeling like an emotional sponge, because you want to stop carrying everyone else's heaviness, because you're ready to reclaim your own inner life, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
Chapter 1. Why your nervous system reads the room. There's a moment that happens so quickly you probably don't even notice it. You walk into a space, a coffee shop, an office, someone's living room, and before anyone speaks, before anything is said, your body already knows. Something is off. Or maybe everything is fine, but someone in the corner is anxious, and now, somehow, so are you. This isn't intuition in the mystical sense. It's not a psychic gift or an overactive imagination. It's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do: read the emotional environment and respond to it. The difference is that your nervous system reads faster, picks up more, and responds more intensely than most people's do. And that difference isn't a malfunction, it's a feature of how you're wired. Let's start with what's actually happening in your body when you walk into a room and immediately sense the mood. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for cues: facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, even subtle shifts in energy that you're not consciously aware of. It's gathering data and making split-second assessments about safety, connection, and emotional climate. For most people, this process runs quietly in the background. They pick up on big, obvious signals, someone yelling, someone crying, but the smaller, subtler cues don't register as strongly. Their nervous system has a kind of natural filter. It sorts through the noise and only alerts them to what's most relevant. But if you're someone who absorbs emotions easily, your nervous system doesn't have that same filter. Or rather, your filter is set to a much finer grade. You pick up on micro-expressions, slight changes in someone's breathing, a shift in the room's energy that most people wouldn't consciously notice. You detect tension before it's named. You feel someone's sadness before they've said a word. This happens because of something called neuroception, a term coined by researcher Stephen Porges to describe the way our nervous system unconsciously evaluates risk and safety. It's happening all the time, beneath your awareness, and it's especially active in people with highly sensitive nervous systems. Your brain is also equipped with mirror neurons, cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that same action. This is part of how we learn, how we connect, how we understand each other. When you see someone smile, your mirror neurons light up as if you are smiling too. When you see someone in pain, your brain mirrors that experience. For sensitive people, this mirroring system tends to be more active. You don't just observe someone else's emotional state, you begin to simulate it in your own body. You feel their tension in your shoulders, their sadness in your chest, their anger in your jaw. This is emotional contagion, and it's a normal human experience. But for you, it's turned up. What other people experience as a faint echo, you experience as a full broadcast. None of this makes you weak. In fact, from an evolutionary perspective, high sensitivity was an advantage. In early human communities, the people who could read emotional shifts quickly were the ones who could detect danger, navigate social dynamics, and respond to the needs of the group. Sensitivity helped communities survive. It still does. The problem isn't the sensitivity itself. The problem is that in modern life, you're exposed to far more emotional input than your system was designed to handle. You're not just tracking the 5 people in your immediate tribe. You're navigating open offices, crowded trains, endless digital feeds, and a constant stream of other people's inner worlds. Your nervous system is doing what it's supposed to do. It's just doing it in an environment that overloads it. And here's the part that's important to understand. Noticing emotions is not the same as absorbing them. You can sense that someone is upset without becoming upset yourself. You can register tension in a room without your body taking on that tension. The sensitivity, the noticing, is not the problem. What happens next is. Absorption happens when you cross from awareness into fusion, when you move from "I notice they're anxious" to "I feel anxious." When their emotional state doesn't just register in your awareness, it starts to live in your body as if it's yours. And often this happens because somewhere along the line, your nervous system learned that absorbing other people's emotions was necessary. Maybe it kept you safe as a child. Maybe it helped you navigate an unpredictable environment. Maybe it was how you stayed connected to people who couldn't regulate their own emotions. This isn't about blaming your past or pathologically your childhood. It's simply recognizing that your sensitivity likely developed in a context where it served a purpose. You learned to track the emotional temperature of a room because it mattered. You learned to attune to other people's needs because your own stability depended on it. But what was once adaptive can become exhausting when it runs on autopilot, when you're constantly absorbing without realizing it, when you've lost the ability to turn the dial down even when you're safe. The hidden cost of all this is enormous. Chronic emotional absorption drains you. It creates decision fatigue because you're not just managing your own feelings, you're managing everyone else's too. It makes it hard to know what you want, what you need, what you actually think because your inner landscape is constantly being rewritten by the people around you. You end up living in a kind of emotional fog. You feel tired for reasons you can't name. You leave interactions drained even when nothing bad happened. You avoid certain people or situations not because you don't care, but because you can't afford the energetic cost. And because most people don't experience the world this way, they don't understand. They think you're overthinking, overreacting, or being too sensitive. But you're not doing any of those things. You're simply living in a body that registers more, feels more, and responds more intensely to the emotional world around you. The good news, and this is where the rest of this book is headed, is that you can learn to stay sensitive without staying merged. You can keep your ability to read the room without letting the room rewrite you. You can notice someone else's pain without your body treating it as your own. The sensitivity, the noticing, is not the problem. What happens next is. Absorption happens when you cross from awareness into fusion, when you move from "I notice they're anxious" to "I feel anxious." When their emotional state doesn't just register in your awareness, it starts to live in your body as if it's yours. And often this happens because somewhere along the line, your nervous system learned that absorbing other people's emotions was necessary. Maybe it kept you safe as a child. Maybe it helped you navigate an unpredictable environment. Maybe it was how you stayed connected to people who couldn't regulate their own emotions. This isn't about blaming your past or pathologically your childhood. It's simply recognizing that your sensitivity likely developed in a context where it served a purpose. You learned to track the emotional temperature of a room because it mattered. You learned to attune to other people's needs because your own stability depended on it. But what was once adaptive can become exhausting when it runs on autopilot, when you're constantly absorbing without realizing it, when you've lost the ability to turn the dial down even when you're safe. The hidden cost of all this is enormous. Chronic emotional absorption drains you. It creates decision fatigue because you're not just managing your own feelings, you're managing everyone else's too. It makes it hard to know what you want, what you need, what you actually think because your inner landscape is constantly being rewritten by the people around you. You end up living in a kind of emotional fog. You feel tired for reasons you can't name. You leave interactions drained even when nothing bad happened. You avoid certain people or situations not because you don't care, but because you can't afford the energetic cost. And because most people don't experience the world this way, they don't understand. They think you're overthinking, overreacting, or being too sensitive. But you're not doing any of those things. You're simply living in a body that registers more, feels more, and responds more intensely to the emotional world around you. The good news, and this is where the rest of this book is headed, is that you can learn to stay sensitive without staying merged. You can keep your ability to read the room without letting the room rewrite you. You can notice someone else's pain without your body treating it as your own. The sensitivity, the noticing, is not the problem. What happens next is.
Chapter 2. The difference between empathy and fusion. There's a version of caring for people that feels noble and necessary. It's the version where you don't just listen to someone's pain, you take it on. You carry it with you. You feel it as if it's happening to you. And somewhere in your mind, you've come to believe that this is what it means to truly care. But there's a quieter truth underneath that belief. What you're doing isn't empathy, it's fusion. And the distinction between the two is everything. Empathy is when you feel with someone. You recognize their pain. You're moved by it. You offer presence, understanding, maybe comfort. But you remain yourself throughout. You know where you end and they begin. You can hold space for their experience without it becoming your experience. Fusion is different. Fusion is when you lose that boundary, when their pain becomes your pain, when their anxiety floods your body, when their emotional state doesn't just touch you, it overtakes you. You stop being a witness to their experience and start living inside it with them. And here's the tricky part. Fusion often feels like connection. It feels like proof that you care, that you're close, that you really understand. It can even feel like love. But what it actually does is erase you. When you fuse with someone, you're not fully present with them. You're dissolved into them. You can't see them clearly because you've merged with their emotional weather. You can't respond thoughtfully because you're too busy trying to regulate what's now flooding your own system. You're not holding space for them. You're drowning alongside them. This is the paradox. The very thing you think is bringing you closer is actually creating distance, because real connection requires two separate people. It requires you to stay grounded in yourself while remaining open to another person. When you fuse, there's no you left to connect with. There's only a reflection of their distress. Let's look at what this feels like in real terms. Imagine a friend calls you upset. They've just been criticized at work and they're spiraling, questioning their competence, wondering if they should quit, convinced they're not good enough. If you're responding with empathy, you listen. You acknowledge how painful that feels. You might say something like, "That sounds really hard. I can hear how much that shook you." You're with them. You care. But you're not inside their spiral. You can still access your own steadiness, your own perspective. You can offer them something solid to lean on. If you're responding with fusion, it's different. As they talk, their panic starts to move into your body. Your chest tightens. You start feeling their inadequacy as if it's yours. By the end of the conversation, you're also questioning whether they're good enough, whether they should quit, whether everything is falling apart. You've left the call not just tired, but destabilized. And worse, you haven't actually helped them because you couldn't offer them anything they weren't already feeling. Fusion doesn't serve anyone. Not them, because they needed your clarity, not your collapse. And not you, because you've just taken on a problem that was never yours to solve. So why do we do it? Why does fusion feel so automatic, so inevitable? Often, it's because we learned early on that merging with someone's emotional state was how we stayed safe or stayed close. Maybe you grew up in an environment where you had to track a parent's mood to know how to behave. Maybe love felt conditional on your ability to soothe or manage someone else's feelings. Maybe the only way to feel connected was to become an emotional mirror. If that's your history, fusion doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like survival. It feels like how relationships work. And the idea of not fusing can feel like abandonment, like coldness, like proof that you don't really care. But caring and merging are not the same thing. You can care deeply about someone and still know that their feelings are theirs to feel. You can be moved by their pain without treating it as a crisis in your own life. You can offer support without offering yourself as a container for everything they can't hold. In fact, the most helpful thing you can do for someone who's struggling is to remain differentiated, to stay anchored in yourself while they're unanchored, to model regulation instead of matching their dysregulation. That's what actually creates safety. That's what allows them to find their way back to steady ground. When you fuse, you're sending an unconscious message: your feelings are too much. I can't handle them either. When you stay present but separate, you're sending a different message. I see you. I'm here, and I trust that you can move through this. There's a subtle moment when empathy crosses into fusion, and learning to catch that moment is one of the most important skills you can develop. It's the moment when I see that you're hurting becomes I am hurting because you're hurting. It's when your body starts responding as if their problem is your emergency. These are clues. They're your system's way of saying, we've crossed over. We're not just witnessing anymore, we're merging. And here's what makes this even more complicated. Fusion doesn't just happen with pain. It happens with any intense emotional state. You can fuse with someone's anger and suddenly find yourself furious at people you don't even know. You can fuse with someone's excitement and lose track of whether you're actually excited or just caught in their energy. You can fuse with someone's anxiety and spend the next 2 hours trying to solve problems that have nothing to do with your life. Fusion is sneaky because it masquerades as caring. It hides behind the language of empathy. You might say, I'm just very empathetic. I feel things deeply. And that might be true. But if you're regularly leaving interactions feeling drained, confused about your own feelings, or carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you, that's not empathy. That's fusion. The myth that many sensitive people carry is this: if I don't merge with your pain, I don't really care about you. If I stay separate, I'm cold, selfish, disconnected. But the opposite is true. When you stay separate, you can actually be present. You can listen without fixing. You can care without carrying. You can offer something real instead of just reflecting back their distress. Empathy says, I see you. Fusion says, I've become you. And only one of those creates the conditions for real help, real healing, real connection. This doesn't mean you won't be affected by the people you love. Of course you will. Their joy will touch you. Their pain will move you. But being affected is not the same as being overtaken. You can feel the impact of someone's emotional state without letting it rewrite your own. The work ahead, and this is what the rest of this book is about, is learning to stay in empathy without slipping into fusion, learning to notice the moment you start to merge and gently bring yourself back, learning to care without disappearing. Because here's the truth, you can be deeply sensitive and still belong to yourself. You can be emotionally available and still maintain your own center. You can love people without becoming them. That's not distance, that's presence, and it's the only kind of connection that lasts.
Chapter 3. What emotional boundaries actually are. If you've spent any time looking for answers to emotional overwhelm, you've probably heard the advice, you need better boundaries. And maybe you've tried. Maybe you've attempted to say no more often, to limit your time with certain people, to protect your energy. And maybe it helped a little. But chances are it didn't solve the core problem, because what most people mean when they talk about boundaries, rules, limits, walls, isn't actually what you need. What you need is something quieter and more fundamental. You need an internal sense of where you end and other people begin. You need a felt experience of your own separate self that doesn't dissolve the moment someone else's emotions enter the room. That's what a real emotional boundary is. It's not a wall.
It's not a script. It's not a way of keeping people out. It's an inner clarity about who you are, what you're feeling, and what belongs to you, even when you're standing next to someone whose feelings are intense, overwhelming, or hard to witness. Let's start by dismantling the most common misconception that boundaries are about controlling other people or limiting connection. They're not. Boundaries aren't something you do to someone else. They're something you maintain within yourself. Think of it this way. A boundary isn't a fence you build around yourself to keep people at a distance. It's more like a sense of your own edges, a quiet internal knowing that says, "This is me. That is you. I can be close to you without becoming you." When you have that clarity, you don't need to push people away. You don't need to rehearse what you'll say or brace yourself before interactions. You simply remain aware of yourself, even in the presence of someone else's intensity. This is harder than it sounds, especially if you've spent years losing yourself in other people's emotional states. But it's possible, and it starts with understanding what boundaries actually do. A boundary creates space for both people to exist at the same time. It allows you to care about someone's experience without abandoning your own. It lets you be affected by someone without being overtaken. It means you can feel compassion for their pain while also knowing that their pain is not your responsibility to fix, carry, or absorb. Here's what boundaries are not. They're not about being cold, distant, or selfish. They're not about shutting down your sensitivity or becoming less caring. They're not about rejecting people or refusing to help. In fact, boundaries make it possible to help in ways that are actually useful because you're responding from a clear, grounded place rather than from emotional fusion. The paradox that sensitive people often struggle with is this: they think boundaries will make them less loving, but the opposite is true. Boundaries create more capacity for real love because you're no longer giving from a place of depletion, resentment, or fusion. You're giving from a place of choice. When you have a boundary, you can say yes because you want to, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you say no. You can be present with someone's struggle without making it your own crisis. You can offer care that's sustainable instead of care that drains you. So how does a boundary actually work? It has 3 parts: awareness, choice, and response. First, awareness. This is the foundation. Before you can have a boundary, you need to notice what's happening inside you. You need to catch the moment when someone else's emotion starts to move into your system. You need to recognize when you're beginning to merge, to lose track of your own center, to take on something that isn't yours. This awareness isn't always easy, especially if fusion has been your default for a long time, but it's a skill you can develop, and it starts with simply asking yourself in the middle of an interaction, what am I feeling right now? Is this mine or is this theirs? Second, choice. Once you're aware that you're starting to absorb someone else's emotional state, you have a choice. You can continue to merge. Sometimes that will happen, and that's okay. Or you can gently redirect your attention back to yourself. You can choose to stay present with them without taking their feelings into your body as if they're yours. This isn't about forcing anything. It's not about shutting down or numbing out. It's a subtle internal shift. It's the quiet decision to remain yourself while staying in the room with them. And third, response. A boundary isn't passive. It's not just about protecting yourself or staying separate. It's about how you engage. Once you're clear about what's yours and what's theirs, you can respond in a way that's actually helpful. You can listen without absorbing. You can validate without merging. You can care without carrying. This is the part that makes boundaries feel generous rather than withholding, because when you're not absorbed in someone else's emotional state, you can offer them something they actually need: your presence, your clarity, your steadiness. Let's talk about why "just don't care" never works, because that's usually the advice people give when they don't understand emotional absorption. Stop caring so much. Detach. It's not your problem. But you can't just decide not to care. Your sensitivity doesn't have an off switch, and even if it did, turning it off would mean losing access to one of your greatest strengths, your ability to feel deeply, to connect, to perceive what others might miss. The goal isn't to stop caring. The goal is to care without losing yourself in the process, and that requires a boundary, not as a wall, but as a way of staying anchored in your own experience while remaining open to someone else's. Detachment doesn't work either, because detachment is a form of numbing. It's a way of protecting yourself by shutting down, and while it might provide temporary relief, it also cuts you off from genuine connection. It makes you feel isolated, distant, and disconnected from the parts of life that matter most. Real boundaries don't require you to shut down. They allow you to stay open, but from a place of self-possession rather than self-abandonment. Here's the truth that most people don't say out loud. Boundaries are uncomfortable at first, especially if you've been living without them. They can feel selfish. They can feel like you're failing someone. They can bring up guilt, fear, or the worry that you're doing something wrong. That discomfort doesn't mean you're hurting anyone. It means you're changing a pattern. It means your system is adjusting to a new way of being in relationship, a way that honors both you and the other person, rather than erasing you in service of them. Over time, that discomfort fades, and what emerges is something quieter and more sustainable, the ability to be with people without disappearing, the capacity to stay present without becoming porous, the freedom to care deeply without carrying everything. Boundaries don't limit connection, they make real connection possible, because real connection requires two people, two distinct, separate selves who choose to be present with each other. When you fuse, when you absorb, when you lose yourself in someone else's emotional world, there's no you left to connect with. There's only an echo of them. A boundary says, I'm here, you're there, and we can be close without being the same. That's not coldness, that's presence, and it's the foundation for everything that follows. In the chapters ahead, you'll learn how to build this internal clarity in real time. You'll learn how to notice when you're starting to merge and how to bring yourself back. You'll learn practices for staying grounded during interactions and for clearing your system afterward. But all of it rests on this understanding. A boundary is not a rejection of others, it's a reclaiming of yourself, and that reclaiming is what makes it possible to stay sensitive, stay caring, and stay whole all at the same time.
Chapter 4. How to tell which emotions are yours. There's a specific kind of confusion that comes with emotional absorption, and it's one of the most disorienting parts of the experience. You're sitting alone in your apartment, feeling anxious. But you weren't anxious this morning, you weren't anxious an hour ago, and when you try to trace the feeling back to a source, a worry, a problem, a reason, there's nothing there, just the feeling itself, free-floating and inexplicable. Or maybe you're irritated, snapping at small things, and you can't figure out why. Or you're sad for no reason you can name. Or you're suddenly exhausted in a way that doesn't match what you've actually done with your day. These moments are clues. They're signs that what you're feeling might not have originated in you. But without a way to check, without a method for sorting through the emotional noise, you're left carrying feelings that don't belong to you and believing they do. This chapter is about developing the single most important skill for anyone who absorbs emotions, the ability to tell the difference between what's yours and what's been absorbed from someone else. It sounds simple. It's not, because emotions don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with labels that say, this is your anxiety, or this anger came from your coworker. They just feel like feelings, and if you've been absorbing other people's emotions for a long time, you've probably lost touch with what your own baseline emotional state even feels like. So we're going to start there, with the concept of a baseline. Your baseline is your default emotional state when you're alone, rested, and not actively dealing with a problem. It's what you feel like when nothing particular is happening. For some people, baseline is calm and neutral. For others, it's a low hum of energy or a quiet contentment. For some, baseline includes a bit of background anxiety or melancholy. That's okay too. The point isn't to have a good baseline. The point is to know what yours is. When you know your baseline, you have a reference point. You can notice when something shifts. You can ask yourself, is this how I usually feel, or is this different? But here's the challenge. If you've been absorbing emotions chronically, your baseline might be hard to find. You might not remember the last time you felt like just yourself. You might wake up already carrying the residue of yesterday's interactions, already braced for today's. If that's the case, you'll need to create some space to find your baseline again. This doesn't require a week alone in the woods. It just requires a few hours of solitude and understimulation. No people, no screens, no input. Just you, in a quiet space, with nothing demanding your attention. Notice what emerges. Not what you think you should feel, but what you actually feel. Is there a baseline calm underneath the noise? A particular kind of tiredness, a specific quality of thought or mood that's distinctly yours? This might feel like nothing at first. That's normal. You're so used to being shaped by external input that your own emotional signal can feel faint or unfamiliar, but it's there. And the more time you spend in quiet, uninterrupted solitude, the more you'll recognize it. Once you have a sense of your baseline, even a rough one, you can start using it as a tool. You can check in with yourself throughout the day and ask, am I at baseline, or has something shifted? This brings us to the practice of tracking the moment absorption begins. And that moment usually happens in 3 phases: before, during, or after an interaction. Before an interaction, you might notice yourself preemptively taking on someone's emotional state. You know you're about to see someone who's stressed, and your body starts preparing by becoming stressed. You're about to walk into a tense meeting, and your shoulders tighten before you've even entered the room. This is anticipatory absorption, and it's a sign that your system is already trying to match the emotional environment before you've even encountered it. During an interaction, absorption is more immediate. You're talking to someone, and somewhere in the middle of the conversation, something shifts inside you. You walked in feeling fine. Now you feel heavy, or anxious, or irritated. The shift might be subtle, or it might be dramatic, but it's there. And it doesn't match your own circumstances, it matches theirs. After an interaction, absorption lingers. You leave the conversation, but the feeling stays. You're still carrying their stress, their sadness, their frustration. It clings to you, even though you're no longer in their presence. This is emotional residue, and it's one of the clearest signs that you've absorbed something that wasn't yours to begin with. So, how do you actually tell the difference in the moment? Start by pausing. This sounds too simple to matter, but it's the foundation of everything. In the middle of an interaction, or right after, take a beat. Give yourself even 10 seconds to check in with your body before you continue. Then ask yourself one simple question. Did I feel this way before I encountered this person or situation? If the answer is no, you're likely dealing with absorption. Let's say you're on the phone with your mother, and halfway through the conversation, you notice your chest feels tight and your thoughts are racing. Pause. Ask yourself, did I feel this way before I picked up the phone? If you didn't, if you were calm or neutral before the call, then what you're feeling now is probably not originating in you. This doesn't mean the feeling isn't real. It is real. It's in your body. But it's not yours in the sense that it's not coming from your life, your problems, your circumstances. It's a response to someone else's emotional state that your system has mirrored. Here's where it gets tricky. Sometimes your own feelings and absorbed feelings blend together. You might be genuinely worried about something in your life, and then you talk to someone who's also worried, and now you can't tell where your worry ends and theirs begins. In those cases, it helps to get more specific. Ask yourself, what exactly am I worried about right now? If the worry is about your own life, your job, your health, your relationship, it's probably yours.
If the worry is vague, unnamed, or about someone else's situation, it's likely absorbed. The body also gives you clues if you know how to listen. Absorbed emotions often show up with specific physical sensations that can help you identify them. Absorbed anxiety might feel like a tightness in your chest or throat, shallow breathing, or a racing heart, but without a clear thought attached to it. Your body is anxious, but your mind isn't generating anxious thoughts about your own life. Absorbed sadness might show up as a heaviness in your chest, a lump in your throat, or a sudden exhaustion, again without a clear reason connected to your own experience. Absorbed anger might arrive as tension in your jaw, shoulders, or fists. You feel wound up, but when you search for what you're angry about, there's nothing. Or what you find is someone else's grievance, not your own. These physical cues are your system's way of signaling that something has been taken in from the outside. And once you start paying attention to them, you'll begin to recognize your own patterns. You'll notice that absorbed emotions have a slightly different quality than your own emotions. They feel less rooted, less coherent, more like static than signal. Another useful question to ask yourself is, does this feeling have a story? Your own emotions almost always come with context. If you're sad, you know why. Something happened, something was lost, something hurts. If you're angry, there's a reason. But absorbed emotions often don't have a story. They're just feelings, floating in your system with no clear origin. If you can't identify why you feel the way you feel, there's a good chance it's not yours. Here's what this practice is not. It's not about getting it right every time. You won't always know for sure whether a feeling is yours or absorbed. Sometimes emotions are layered and complex. Sometimes they're both. That's okay. The goal isn't perfect accuracy. The goal is simply to start paying attention, to develop a curiosity about your own emotional experience, to stop assuming that every feeling you have must be yours. This skill takes time. At first, you might not notice until hours later, or even the next day, that what you were feeling wasn't yours. That's progress. Eventually, you'll start catching it during the interaction, and over time, with practice, you'll catch it right as it's beginning. The more you practice this, the more you'll start to trust your own emotional experience. You'll stop second-guessing yourself. You'll know when something belongs to you and when it's been picked up from someone else. And that knowing creates space. Space to choose. Space to release what isn't yours. Space to return to yourself. For now, just start with the basics. Notice your baseline. Check in with yourself before, during, and after interactions. Ask the simple question, did I feel this before? Pay attention to your body's signals. That's enough. That's where it begins.
Chapter 5. Staying grounded in real time. Knowing that you've absorbed someone else's emotion is useful, but knowing doesn't stop it from happening. You can recognize that the anxiety flooding your chest isn't yours, that the heaviness weighing you down came from the person sitting across from you, and still feel completely overtaken by it. This is where most advice falls short. It tells you to be aware, to notice, to set boundaries, but it doesn't tell you what to do in the actual moment when you're sitting in a room with someone whose distress is starting to seep into your system. It doesn't tell you how to stay present with them without disappearing into their emotional state. That's what this chapter is about, how to ground yourself in real time, during the interaction, while it's happening, so you can remain connected to the other person without losing connection to yourself. The first thing to understand is that grounding isn't about controlling your emotions or forcing yourself to feel a certain way. It's not about suppressing what's coming up or pretending you're unaffected. Grounding is simply the practice of returning your awareness to your own body, your own presence, your own center, even while staying engaged with someone else. Think of it like this. When you're absorbing someone's emotion, your attention has left you. It's moved into their experience. You're tracking their feelings, their needs, their state, and you've stopped tracking your own. Grounding is the act of bringing your attention back home, back into your own body, without shutting the other person out. It's a both-and practice. You can be with them and with yourself at the same time.
The simplest and most effective grounding tool is your breath, not because there's anything magical about breathing, but because your breath is always with you, always accessible, and always pulls your awareness back into your body. When you notice you're starting to absorb, when you feel that telltale tightness in your chest, that racing in your mind, that sense of being pulled out of yourself, pause internally and find your breath. You don't need to leave the conversation. You don't need to excuse yourself or close your eyes or make it obvious. Just bring your attention to the sensation of breathing. Notice the air moving in and out. Notice your chest or belly rising and falling. Do this for 3 breaths. That's all. This isn't about deep breathing or trying to calm yourself down. It's about anchoring. You're using the breath as a way to locate yourself again, to remember that you're here, in your own body, even while someone else is struggling in theirs. Some people find it helpful to make the exhale slightly longer than the inhale, breathing in for a count of 3, out for a count of 4 or 5. This sends a signal to your nervous system that you're safe, that there's no emergency. But even if you just breathe normally and pay attention to it, that's enough. The act of noticing your breath is what brings you back. Another powerful grounding practice is physical sensation. When you're absorbed, you're living in your head, in thoughts, worries, interpretations, stories. Your body becomes a ghost. You're not inhabiting it anymore. To come back, you need to feel something physical. The simplest way is through your feet. Right now, as you're reading this, notice your feet on the ground. Feel the pressure, the contact, the solidity. If you're sitting, notice your legs against the chair. Notice the weight of your body being held. You can do this in the middle of any conversation, any interaction, without anyone knowing. Just bring a small portion of your awareness down to the sensation of your feet on the floor. Feel the ground beneath you. Let it remind you that you're here, in your own body, in your own space. If you're standing, you can press your feet down slightly, just enough to feel the floor push back. If you're sitting, you can feel your sit bones on the chair, the support beneath you. These small, subtle physical cues pull your attention out of the emotional whirlwind and back into the simple, tangible reality of your body in space. Some people find it helpful to touch something, the edge of a table, the fabric of their clothing, their own hands, anything that provides a neutral sensory input. This isn't about distraction, it's about creating a counterbalance to the emotional pull. It's about giving your nervous system something concrete to hold on to. There's also a practice I call parallel awareness. This is the skill of tracking 2 things at once, the other person's experience and your own. Most of the time when you're absorbing, your attention is completely focused on them. You're hyper-attuned to their emotional state. You're monitoring their tone, their body language, their needs, and you've made them the center of your awareness, and you've stopped tracking your own. Grounding is the act of bringing your attention back home, back into your own body, without shutting the other person out. It's a both-and practice. You can be with them and with yourself at the same time. This is what might look like in practice. You're having coffee with a friend who's going through a breakup. They're talking about how lost they feel, how devastated. As you listen, you notice your chest starting to tighten. That's the signal. That's absorption beginning. Instead of getting pulled all the way in, you silently anchor yourself. You feel your feet on the floor. You take a slow breath and notice the sensation of it. You keep one part of your awareness on your friend. You're still listening, still nodding, still present, but another part of your awareness stays with you. You're here. You're solid. You're not falling into their despair with them. This doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes you more useful. Because now you can offer them something steady, something grounded. You're not just mirroring their distress back at them. You're holding a different energy, a calm, witnessing presence that says, I see you, and I'm not drowning with you.
Sometimes, in the middle of an interaction, you'll need to reset more fully. You'll realize you've already absorbed more than you meant to, and just breathing or feeling your feet isn't enough. In those moments, you might need to create a brief pause. You can do this without being awkward about it. Excuse yourself to get water, to use the bathroom, to step outside for a moment. Give yourself 2 minutes away from the interaction to physically shake it off. Literally, shake your hands, roll your shoulders, take a few deeper breaths. Move your body in some small way that discharges the energy you've taken on. Then, before you go back, take one more breath and remind yourself, I can be present without merging. I can care without carrying. I can stay here in my own body even while I'm with them. This kind of mid-interaction reset can make all the difference. It interrupts the pattern before it fully takes hold. One of the most subtle but powerful grounding tools is the felt sense of your own emotional center. This is harder to describe because it's not a physical location. It's more like an energetic awareness of your own core, the part of you that remains steady even when emotions are swirling. Some people experience this as a sense of inner stillness, a quiet place they can return to. Others experience it as a kind of weight or presence in the center of their body, around the chest or belly. It's the part of you that doesn't change, even when feelings do. When you're grounded in this center, you can feel emotions without being ruled by them. You can notice someone else's distress without it destabilizing you. You remain anchored in your own being. If this sounds abstract, don't worry. You don't need to fully understand it to practice it. Just begin by asking yourself, in the middle of an interaction, where is my center right now? Can I feel it? Can I come back to it? Even the question itself can bring you back. Here's what's important to remember. Grounding in real time is not about performing perfectly. You won't catch every moment of absorption before it happens. You won't always stay grounded. Sometimes you'll lose yourself completely, and you won't realize it until the conversation is over. That's okay. This is a practice, not a test. The goal is simply to start noticing sooner, coming back more often, staying with yourself a little longer each time. Over time, these small moments of grounding add up. Your system starts to learn that it's possible to stay present without merging. Your nervous system begins to trust that you can be close to someone's pain without taking it into your body as your own. And gradually, staying grounded becomes less effortful. It becomes a natural part of how you move through interactions. You don't have to think about it as much. You just do it. You breathe. You feel your feet. You hold parallel awareness. You remain here, even while being there with them. That's the skill. That's what makes it possible to stay sensitive and stay whole at the same time. You're not shutting anyone out. You're not becoming less caring. You're just learning to stay found while being with someone who's lost. And that changes everything.
Chapter 6. After the interaction, emotional clearing. You've made it through the conversation. You stayed as present as you could. You tried to ground yourself, to notice when you were absorbing, to keep some thread of awareness on your own center. And now it's over. You're alone again. And you still feel terrible. Their anxiety is still in your chest. Their sadness is still weighing on your shoulders. Their frustration is still humming under your skin. You left the room, but you didn't leave the feeling behind. This is one of the most exhausting parts of emotional absorption, the way it lingers, the way other people's emotional states cling to you long after the interaction has ended. You carry them home. You carry them into your evening. Sometimes you carry them into the next day. And because most people don't experience this, they don't understand why you need time to recover after social interaction. They don't understand why a simple coffee date or a work meeting can leave you feeling drained for hours. They think you're being dramatic or antisocial, but you're not. You're just trying to clear out what you've absorbed so you can find yourself again. This chapter is about what to do after the interaction, how to release the emotional residue that's been left behind, how to help your system return to baseline instead of staying stuck in someone else's emotional weather. The first thing to understand is that transition time is not optional. It's not self-indulgent. It's not something you do only if you have the luxury of extra time. It's essential maintenance, especially if you're someone who absorbs easily. Think of it this way. If you spent an hour in a dusty attic, you'd wash your hands and change your clothes when you came out. You wouldn't feel guilty about it. You wouldn't skip it just because you're busy. You'd recognize that you picked up something that needs to be cleaned off. Emotional absorption works the same way. You've been in close contact with someone else's inner world, and some of it has stuck to you. You need to clear it off. Not because there's anything wrong with them or their emotions, but because those emotions aren't yours to carry. The challenge is that most of us don't build in transition time. We go straight from one interaction to the next. We finish a difficult conversation and immediately check our phone, respond to emails, jump into the next task. We don't give ourselves even 5 minutes to reset. And then we wonder why we feel so scattered, so overwhelmed, so unlike ourselves. So the first practice, the foundation of all clearing, is to claim transition time. Even if it's brief, even if it's just 10 minutes, give yourself a buffer between the interaction and whatever comes next. Ideally, this happens immediately after you leave. The sooner you clear, the easier it is. The longer you wait, the more the absorbed emotion settles into your system and starts to feel like it's yours. If you've just left someone's house, sit in your car for a few minutes before you drive away. If you've finished a phone call, don't immediately start the next thing. If you've wrapped up a work meeting, take a walk around the block before returning to your desk. This small pause signals to your system, we're shifting now. We're leaving that emotional space and coming back to our own. So, what do you actually do during this transition time? There are several practices that help, and different ones will resonate with different people. The key is to find what works for your system and to do it consistently, not just when you're desperate. One of the most effective clearing practices is movement. Absorbed emotions live in your body, and movement helps discharge them. This doesn't have to be intense exercise. It can be as simple as shaking out your hands and arms, rolling your shoulders, stretching, or taking a short walk. There's something about moving your body that interrupts the holding pattern. It reminds your nervous system that you're separate, that you have your own physical boundaries, that you can literally shake off what doesn't belong to you. Some people find it helpful to be more intentional about it. Stand up and literally shake your whole body for 30 seconds. Arms, legs, torso, everything. It might feel silly, but it works. You're not trying to look graceful. You're trying to release energy that's been absorbed and is now stuck. Water is another powerful clearing tool. If you can, wash your hands with cold water. Let the water run over your wrists. Splash some on your face. If you're at home, take a shower. There's something about water, especially cold water, that helps reset your system. It's both physical and symbolic. You're washing away what you've picked up. Even drinking water can help. It's a simple grounding act that brings you back into your own body, into your own needs. Fresh air also matters more than you might think. If you've been inside with someone, step outside. Let the air move around you. Take a few deep breaths of clean, outdoor air. Open a window if you can't go outside. The shift in environment, the change in air quality, helps your system recognize that you've left that emotional space. Silence is often underrated as a clearing practice. After intense interaction, especially if the other person was talking a lot or the conversation was emotionally heavy, your system needs quiet. No music, no podcast, no scrolling. Just silence. Give your nervous system a break from input. Let it settle. Let the noise clear. Silence creates space for you to hear yourself again without interference. This might only need to be 5 or 10 minutes, but those minutes matter. They're the difference between carrying absorbed emotions for hours and releasing them relatively quickly. Some people find it helpful to do a brief body scan after an interaction. Sit quietly and bring your attention to different parts of your body. Notice where you're holding tension. Notice where absorbed emotion has settled, often in the chest, shoulders, jaw, or stomach. As you notice each area, breathe into it. Imagine the breath moving through that space, loosening it, releasing what's stuck there.
You're not trying to force anything, you're just bringing awareness and breath to places that have tightened or absorbed something that isn't yours. Another practice that helps some people is naming what happened. Out loud or in writing, simply state, "I absorbed some of their anxiety. That's not mine. I'm releasing it now." Or, "I'm feeling heavy because I took on their sadness. I'm letting that go." There's something about naming it clearly that helps your system release it. It creates distinction. It reminds you that this feeling has a source outside of you, and you have the ability to let it go. This isn't about denying that you were affected. You were, but being affected and being overtaken are different things. You can acknowledge that you felt something while also recognizing that it doesn't need to stay with you. Here's what's important. Clearing doesn't mean you're erasing your care for the person. You're not dismissing their struggle or deciding you don't want to be involved. You're simply releasing the emotional charge you absorbed so that you can return to your center. You can still care about them. You can still think about them, hope for them, support them, but you do it from a place of clarity rather than from a place of fusion. Sometimes, even after you've done all of this, some residue remains. You've moved your body, you've washed your hands, you've sat in silence, and you still feel something lingering. That's okay. Not every clearing is immediate or complete.
In those cases, it helps to give it time and space. Go to bed early. Let sleep do some of the clearing for you. Your system processes a lot overnight, and often you'll wake up feeling lighter, more like yourself. If it's still there the next day, repeat the clearing practices. Shake it off again. Take another walk. Spend time alone. Be patient with yourself. Some absorbed emotions are stickier than others, especially if the person you were with was someone you're very close to, or if the emotion was particularly intense. The goal is not to be perfectly clear all the time. The goal is to have a set of tools you can use to help your system release what it's absorbed, so you're not carrying everyone else's emotions indefinitely. One more thing, it's useful to create a personalized post-social routine, something you do consistently after any significant interaction. It doesn't have to be elaborate, it just has to be yours. Maybe it's always taking a 10-minute walk. Maybe it's always washing your hands and face. Maybe it's sitting in your car and taking 5 deep breaths before you drive home. Maybe it's spending 20 minutes alone in a quiet room with no input. Whatever it is, make it a ritual. Make it something your system can count on. Over time, your nervous system will start to associate that ritual with release, with coming back to yourself. It becomes a signal. The interaction is over, and now we're clearing. Now we're coming home. This isn't about being fragile or high maintenance. This is about honoring the way your system works. You absorb more than most people. That means you need to clear more than most people. It's not a flaw, it's just a reality. And when you work with it instead of against it, everything becomes more manageable. You can be sensitive and social. You can care deeply and stay clear. You can engage with people and still come back to yourself, but only if you give yourself the time and space to clear what you've absorbed along the way.
Chapter 7. The Inner No. Choosing What You Carry. There's a moment that happens beneath your conscious awareness, faster than thought. Someone shares their pain with you, and before you've decided anything, before you've chosen how to respond, your system has already opened the door. Their emotion walks in, and suddenly it's living inside you as if it's yours. This chapter is about reclaiming that moment. It's about learning to make a choice, a quiet, internal choice about what you let in and what you hold at a compassionate distance. This is perhaps the most difficult skill for sensitive people to develop because it requires you to do something that feels fundamentally wrong, to say no, not out loud, not to the person, but internally. To say, quietly and firmly, I see your pain and I'm not taking it into my body. If you're someone who has spent your life absorbing, this will feel like abandonment. It will feel selfish. It will feel like proof that you don't really care. But none of that is true. What's actually true is this.
You can witness someone's pain without becoming it. You can care deeply without carrying their emotional weight. You can be present without being porous. The inner no is not a rejection of the person. It's a boundary around your own system. It's the decision to stay separate even while staying connected. Let's be clear about what this is not. This is not about shutting down. It's not about numbing yourself or pretending you don't feel anything. It's not about building walls or becoming emotionally unavailable. The inner no is subtle. It's a choice made in the space between noticing someone's emotion and absorbing it. Most people don't realize that space exists. They think feeling someone else's pain and taking it on are the same thing, but they're not. There's a moment, brief but real, where you can feel the pull of their emotion without following it all the way in. That's where the inner no lives. Here's what it feels like in practice. You're with someone who's deeply anxious. You can feel their anxiety in the room. It's palpable. Your system registers it. There's a tug, an invitation to match their state, to join them in their spiral. And in that moment, you make a choice. Not a harsh, forceful choice, not a rejection, just a quiet internal decision. I feel this, but I'm not becoming this. You stay present, you listen, you care, but you don't let their anxiety override your own nervous system. You hold your ground. This requires a kind of dual awareness that we talked about in an earlier chapter, the ability to track both their experience and your own at the same time. You're with them, but you're also with yourself. You're witnessing their pain without abandoning your own center. The reason this is so hard is that for many sensitive people, staying separate feels like distance. It feels like you're not really there, not really caring. But the opposite is true. When you stay grounded in yourself, you can actually be more present with them, because you're not scrambling to manage the flood of emotion that just poured into your system. You're not drowning alongside them. You're standing on solid ground, offering them something steady to hold on to. Think of it this way. If someone is lost in the woods, you don't help them by getting lost too. You help them by staying oriented, by holding the map, by being the person who knows the way out. The same is true with emotional absorption. When you stay clear, when you don't merge with their distress, you become a resource for them. You model regulation. You offer them a felt sense of calm, of possibility, of this will pass. But if you absorb their emotion, if you join them in their panic or despair, you're just two people lost in the woods together, and neither of you can help the other find the way out. So how do you actually practice the inner no? How do you make that choice in real time? It starts with awareness, as always. You have to notice the moment when the pull begins. You have to catch yourself right as you feel the tug to merge, to absorb, to take on what they're feeling. This takes practice. At first, you won't catch it until after it's already happened, but over time, you'll start to recognize the sensation, that subtle shift in your body, that opening, that moment when your boundaries start to dissolve. When you catch it, pause internally. You don't need to pause the conversation. You don't need to stop listening. Just pause your own system for a second. Take a breath, feel your feet, locate yourself. And then quietly make the choice. You can say it silently to yourself, this is theirs, not mine, or I see this, but I'm not carrying this, or simply, no. It's not a loud no, it's not forceful or harsh, it's more like a gentle redirection. You're steering your attention and your energy back towards yourself, back towards your own boundaries, instead of letting them spill over into the other person's emotional world. Some people find this helpful to visualize it. You might imagine yourself as a clear boundary between you and them, not a wall, but a permeable membrane that lets connection through but doesn't let their emotions flood into your system. Or you might imagine yourself as solid, grounded, rooted, while their emotion moves around you but doesn't move through you. The image doesn't matter as much as the felt sense. You're creating an internal experience of separation, of distinction, of this is me, that is you. Here's what makes this even more complex. The inner no isn't a one-time decision. You don't say it once and then you're done. You might need to say it multiple times during a conversation. You might catch yourself starting to absorb, you pull back, and then 5 minutes later it's happening again, so you pull back again. This is normal. Absorption is a deeply ingrained pattern, and changing it requires consistent, gentle repetition. You're retraining your nervous system. You're teaching it that it's possible to stay close without merging, to care without carrying.
Be patient with yourself. This is subtle, difficult work. One of the biggest obstacles to practicing the inner no is guilt. You'll feel guilty for not taking on their pain. You'll feel like you're being selfish, like you're not doing enough, like you're failing them somehow. This guilt is a sign that you're changing a pattern. It's not evidence that you're doing something wrong, it's evidence that you're doing something different. The truth is, you're not helping anyone by absorbing their emotions. You think you are. You think that by feeling what they feel, you're showing them you understand. You're proving you care. But what you're actually doing is destabilizing yourself. And a destabilized person can't offer real support. When you stay grounded, when you hold your center, you give them something far more valuable than commiseration. You give them presence. You give them witness. You give them the experience of being seen and held without being pulled down. That's what people actually need when they're struggling. Not someone to drown with them, but someone to stay steady while they're unsteady. The inner no is also important because it protects your capacity to care over the long term. If you absorb every emotion from every person you encounter, you'll burn out. You'll become exhausted, resentful, depleted, and eventually you'll start avoiding people altogether, not because you don't care, but because you can't afford the cost. But if you practice the inner no, if you learn to stay separate while staying connected, you can sustain your care. You can show up for people without losing yourself. You can be there for the long haul instead of just until you're too drained to continue. This is an act of self-preservation, yes, but it's also an act of love, because it means you'll still be here, still available, still capable of caring, long after you would have collapsed from carrying too much. Let's talk about what this looks like with the people closest to you, the ones whose pain you feel most acutely. A partner, a parent, a child, a best friend. These are the relationships where the inner no feels most impossible because you love them, because their suffering matters to you, because it feels like betrayal to not take on what they're carrying. But here's the paradox. The closer you are to someone, the more important it is that you don't merge with them, because if you do, you lose your ability to actually help. You become reactive instead of responsive. You become part of the problem instead of part of the solution. When your partner is anxious and you absorb their anxiety, you can't offer them calm. When your parent is depressed and you take on their depression, you can't offer them hope. When your friend is spiraling and you spiral with them, you can't offer them perspective. The inner no in close relationships doesn't mean you care less. It means you care in a way that's actually useful. You can say, I see how hard this is for you, without also saying, and now it's hard for me too. You can hold space for their struggle without making it your own crisis. You can love them fiercely while also knowing that their emotional state is theirs to navigate, not yours to fix or carry. This doesn't mean you do nothing. You still support them, you still listen, validate, offer help where it's appropriate, but you do it from a place of clarity, not from a place of fusion. And over time, they'll feel the difference. They'll feel that you're truly present, not just mirroring their distress back at them. They'll feel held by your steadiness instead of matched in their chaos. And that's what actually helps. The inner no is not a rejection of others. It's not coldness or detachment or a failure of empathy. It's the opposite. It's the recognition that real presence requires boundaries, that real love requires you to remain yourself, that you can only give from a place of fullness, not from a place of dissolution. You're allowed to see someone's pain and not take it into your body.
You're allowed to care about their struggle without making it your emergency. You're allowed to stay grounded even when they're not. That's not abandonment. That's presence, and it's the only kind of care that lasts.
Chapter 8. Rebuilding Your Emotional Center. There's a question you might not have asked yourself in a long time, maybe ever. What do I actually feel? Not what you think you should feel, not what you've absorbed from the person you just talked to, not what you're supposed to feel based on your circumstances, but what you, at your core, beneath all the layers of other people's emotions, actually feel. If that question brings up nothing or confusion or a kind of blankness, that's not unusual. When you've spent years absorbing other people's emotional states, you lose touch with your own. Your inner landscape becomes so crowded with everyone else's weather that you can't find your own climate anymore. This chapter is about reclaiming that. It's about rebuilding a stable emotional center, a sense of self that remains steady and recognizable even when the people around you are not. This isn't about becoming unshakable or invulnerable. You'll still feel things. You'll still be moved, affected, changed by life. But you'll have a baseline to return to, a sense of who you are emotionally that doesn't shift completely every time you encounter someone else's intensity. Let's start with what happens when you lose your emotional center. It's a gradual erosion, usually. It doesn't happen all at once. But over time, as you absorb more and more, as you prioritize tracking other people's states over tracking your own, something inside you begins to fade. You stop knowing what you want because you're too busy sensing what everyone else wants. You stop knowing what you feel because you're carrying what everyone else feels. You stop trusting your own reactions because they've become so tangled with other people's reactions that you can't tell them apart anymore. You become a kind of emotional chameleon, shifting and adapting to whatever environment you're in. And while that might help you navigate relationships in the short term, it's exhausting. And it's lonely because no one actually knows you. They only know the version of you that's adapted to them. Worse, you don't know you anymore either. Rebuilding your emotional center starts with the recognition that you've lost touch with it. That might sound obvious, but many people who absorb chronically don't realize this has happened. They think the confusion, the exhaustion, the constant sense of being overwhelmed is just how life feels. They don't realize they're living untethered from their own emotional core. So if you're reading this and recognizing yourself, if you're realizing that you don't actually know what you feel most of the time, that's the beginning. That awareness is the foundation. The next step is creating space to feel yourself again, and that requires something most absorbers resist: solitude. Real solitude. Not just being physically alone while scrolling your phone or watching TV, but true, quiet, understimulated alone time where there's no external input demanding your attention. This is not optional. You cannot rebuild your emotional center while constantly absorbing new input. You need time away from other people's emotions, other people's needs, other people's energy. You need time to let all of that settle and clear so you can hear yourself again. For some people, this means setting aside an hour each day. For others, it's a longer stretch, a weekend, a week if possible. The duration matters less than the quality. What matters is that during this time, you're not consuming content, you're not processing anyone else's emotions, you're not performing or producing, you're just being. At first, this might feel uncomfortable. It might feel boring or anxious-making. That's normal. When you're used to being flooded with input, silence feels strange. Your system might not know what to do with the space. Sit with it anyway. Let it be awkward. Let it be uncomfortable. That discomfort is the signal that something is shifting, that you're breaking a pattern. As you sit in that quiet space, start paying attention to what's actually present in you. Not what you think should be there, not what you wish were there, but what is. You might notice a low-level anxiety that's always humming underneath, or a sadness you've been carrying for so long you forgot it was there. or maybe a surprising lightness, a relief at not having to track anyone else for a while. Whatever it is, just notice it. Don't judge it, don't try to fix it or change it, just acknowledge it. This is what I'm feeling right now. This is what's here when no one else's emotions are crowding the space. This practice of noticing, without judgment, without trying to change anything, is how you start to rebuild connection with yourself. You're learning to listen to your own emotional signals again. You're remembering what your own inner voice sounds like. Over time, you'll start to recognize patterns. You'll notice that underneath all the absorbed emotions, you have a particular quality of feeling that's distinctly yours. Maybe you tend toward a quiet melancholy. Maybe your baseline is actually quite calm. Maybe there's a subtle anxiety that's yours, not absorbed, something that's been with you so long you didn't realize it was part of your emotional architecture. None of this is good or bad. It's just true. And knowing it, knowing what's actually yours, is incredibly clarifying because now you have a reference point. You know what you feel like when you're not carrying everyone else's weight. Another part of rebuilding your center is reclaiming your preferences. When you've been absorbing for a long time, you often lose touch with what you actually like, want, or need. You've been so focused on accommodating everyone else's preferences that you've stopped checking in with your own. So start small. Start asking yourself simple questions throughout the day. What do I want to eat right now? What do I actually feel like doing? Do I want to talk to this person, or am I just saying yes out of habit? Notice when you're about to defer to someone else's preference automatically. Pause. Check in with yourself. What do I want here? At first, you might not know. You might draw a blank. That's okay. Keep asking. Over time, your system will start responding. You'll start noticing that you do have preferences, desires, needs. They've just been buried under everyone else's. This is not selfish. This is essential. You cannot have an emotional center if you don't know what you want, what you feel, what matters to you. Those things are the building blocks of selfhood. There's also the practice of honoring your own emotional responses instead of second-guessing them. When you feel something, anything, resist the urge to immediately question whether it's valid, whether it makes sense, whether it's the right thing to feel. Just let yourself feel it, without explanation, without justification, without comparing it to how someone else would feel in the same situation. Your feelings don't need to be rational. They don't need to make perfect sense. They just need to be acknowledged as yours. This is harder than it sounds, because many absorbers have learned to distrust their own emotions. They've been told they're too sensitive, too reactive, too much. They've internalized the message that their feelings aren't reliable, that they need to be managed or controlled or explained away. But your feelings are information. They're data about your experience. And when you honor them, when you treat them as valid simply because they're happening, you start to rebuild trust in yourself. Part of rebuilding your center is also about creating stability in your daily life. When everything is chaotic, when your schedule is unpredictable, when you're constantly in reactive mode, it's nearly impossible to maintain an emotional center. You need some structure, some rhythm, some predictability.
This doesn't mean your life has to be rigid or boring. It just means having a few anchors: regular sleep, regular meals, regular time alone, regular practices that ground you. These become the scaffolding that supports your emotional stability. When you have those anchors in place, you have something to return to. Even if you've had a day of absorbing, even if you've gotten pulled off center, you have these steady points that help you find your way back. Here's something else that matters. You need to give yourself permission to be inconsistent, to have days where you feel clear and days where you don't. Rebuilding your emotional center is not about achieving some perfect state of balance and staying there forever. It's about developing the capacity to return to yourself after you've been knocked off course. Some days you'll be solid and grounded. Other days you'll absorb everything and feel completely destabilized. That's normal. That's human.
The difference is that now you know what your center feels like, and you know how to come back to it. You're not trying to be invulnerable, you're trying to be resilient. And resilience isn't about never falling apart, it's about knowing how to put yourself back together. As you do this work, you might notice something unexpected. Relationships start to shift. When you stop absorbing, when you stop automatically adapting to everyone around you, some people won't like it. They've grown accustomed to you being a certain way, to you accommodating them, to you being emotionally porous. When you start holding your center, it changes the dynamic, and not everyone will welcome that change. This can be painful, but it's also clarifying, because the relationships that are built on you dissolving yourself can't survive you becoming solid, and that's okay. Those relationships were costing you too much anyway. The people who truly love you, not the version of you that mirrors them, but the real you, will adjust. They'll respect your boundaries, they'll appreciate your clarity, and your relationships with them will deepen, because now you're actually present as yourself, not as a reflection of their needs. Rebuilding your emotional center is not a quick process. It takes time. It takes consistency. It takes patience with yourself on the days when you feel like you're back at square one. But it's possible, and it's worth it. Because at the end of this process, you don't just know how to stop absorbing other people's emotions, you know who you are underneath all of that. You have a sense of your own emotional ground, your own preferences, your own responses. You have a self to come back to. And from that place, from that solid, stable center, you can be as sensitive as you've always been. You can care as deeply as you always have, but you won't disappear in the process. You'll stay here, present, clear, whole. And that changes everything.
Chapter 9. Staying open without losing yourself. There's a fear that lives at the heart of this work, and it needs to be named. The fear that if you stop absorbing, if you build boundaries, if you reclaim your emotional center, you'll become cold, distant, less capable of connection, less yourself. The fear that protecting yourself means closing your heart. This chapter is here to tell you that fear is wrong, not just a little wrong, but fundamentally wrong. Because the truth is this, you can only truly open when you're not afraid of losing yourself. You can only stay genuinely present when you know you won't dissolve. You can only love fully when you trust that loving someone won't erase you. Boundaries don't diminish your capacity for connection, they expand it. This is the integration. This is where everything you've learned comes together into a way of being that honors both your sensitivity and your sovereignty, where you're neither shut down nor merged, where you can be deeply affected by life, by people, by love, and still remain yourself. Let's start with what this actually feels like in practice, because it's subtle, it's not dramatic, it doesn't announce itself. You're with someone you love and they're going through something difficult. You feel moved by their pain. You feel the ache of it. Your heart opens to them. But somewhere inside, there's also a quiet steadiness, a sense of your own ground that doesn't shift even as you witness their struggle. You're present with them, fully, deeply present, but you're also present with yourself. You're holding both at the same time. And because you're not drowning in their emotion, because you're not scrambling to manage what's flooding your system, you can actually be useful. You can listen more clearly. You can offer something real. That's what it feels like to be open without losing yourself. It's not detachment. It's not coldness. It's a kind of grounded presence that allows for both connection and distinction. This is possible because you've done the work in the previous chapters. You've learned to notice when you're absorbing. You've practiced grounding in real time. You've developed the inner know. You've rebuilt your emotional center. All of that has created a foundation, a sense of self that can stay intact even when emotions are running high. But integration isn't just about using those skills mechanically. It's about embodying them. It's about reaching a point where staying grounded doesn't feel like work anymore, where it becomes your natural way of being in relationship. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen perfectly, but it does happen. Here's what makes this possible.
When you're grounded in your own center, your nervous system relaxes. It doesn't have to work so hard to figure out who you are, what you're feeling, what's safe. It knows, and that knowing creates space. Space to be present, space to feel, space to connect without collapsing. Think of it like this. When you're absorbing, when you're merged, your system is in a constant state of alert. It's trying to track too much. Your emotions, their emotions, the boundary between the two that keeps dissolving. It's exhausting. And that exhaustion makes you want to either shut down completely or avoid people altogether. But when you're grounded, when you have clear boundaries, your system can rest. It doesn't have to do that frantic tracking anymore. It can simply be. And from that place of rest, connection becomes easier, more natural, more sustainable. This is the paradox that sensitive people struggle to believe. The more solid you are in yourself, the more open you can be to others. The more you know your own boundaries, the less afraid of intimacy. The more you trust that you won't lose yourself, the deeper you can love. Let's talk about what this looks like in different contexts, because staying open without losing yourself isn't one size fits all. It shifts depending on the relationship, the situation, the day. With intimate relationships, partners, close friends, family, staying open without losing yourself means you can be vulnerable without being engulfed. You can share deeply without merging. You can let someone in without giving them the power to rewrite your entire emotional state. It means you can have a difficult conversation without it destabilizing you for days. You can witness your partner's anxiety without becoming anxious. You can support a friend through grief without taking on their grief as your own. And paradoxically, this makes you more available for real intimacy because you're not constantly managing the boundaries that keep dissolving. You're not bracing yourself against the inevitable absorption. You're just there, open, clear, steady. With more casual relationships, coworkers, acquaintances, people you encounter in daily life, staying open without losing yourself means you can be friendly, present, and engaged without taking on their energy. You can have a conversation with someone who's stressed without leaving the interaction feeling stressed yourself. You can be kind without being porous. This makes social interaction far less exhausting. You stop dreading it. You stop needing days to recover from a simple coffee date or a work meeting. You can move through your day interacting with people without constantly losing and then having to rebuild yourself. In group settings, parties, meetings, family gatherings, staying open without losing yourself means you can be in the room, present and engaged, without being overwhelmed by the collective emotional field. You can notice the tension or the joy or whatever's in the air, but you don't have to become it. You remain your own person even in a crowd. Here's what's important to understand. This isn't about being perfectly balanced all the time. You won't be. There will still be days when you absorb more than you meant to. There will still be interactions that knock you off center. There will still be people whose emotions affect you more deeply than others. That's not failure. That's being human. That's being sensitive in a world full of emotion. The difference is that now you have a way back. You know what your center feels like. You know how to ground yourself. You know how to clear what you've absorbed. You know how to practice the inner no. So even when you do get pulled off course, and you will, you're not lost. You're just temporarily disoriented, and you know how to find your way back. This is what resilience actually looks like. Not never falling, but knowing how to stand back up. Another aspect of staying open without losing yourself is learning to discern when closeness serves you and when it doesn't. Not everyone deserves full access to you. Not every relationship warrants the same level of openness. This isn't about judging people or deciding who's worthy of your care. It's about recognizing that your energy is finite, and some relationships deplete you more than others. Some people are safe to be open with, others aren't. And you're allowed to adjust your level of openness accordingly. With people who respect your boundaries, who don't expect you to absorb their emotions, who meet you with their own groundedness, you can be fully open. You can let your guard down because there's no guard needed. With people who are chronically dysregulated, who expect you to manage their emotional state, who pull on you constantly, you can still care about them, but you stay more boundaried. You offer what you can without dissolving yourself. This isn't unkind, it's wise. It's the recognition that staying open doesn't mean being indiscriminately available to everyone all the time. You're allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to choose where you invest your emotional resources, and you can do that while still being a caring, loving, sensitive person. There's also the ongoing practice of checking in with yourself. Even after you've integrated all of this, even after grounding and boundaries have become more natural, you still need to pay attention. You still need to notice when you're starting to slip, when you're beginning to absorb, when your center is starting to drift.
This checking in becomes quieter over time, less effortful, more automatic, but it's always there. A gentle background awareness that says, am I still here? Am I still myself? And when the answer is anything other than yes, you know what to do. You breathe, you ground, you come back. This is the practice, not perfection, but return, not invulnerability, but resilience. Not shutdown, but conscious presence. Here's what changes as you integrate this work. Your relationship to your sensitivity shifts. It stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a gift. Not because sensitivity becomes easier, but because you learn how to hold it without being overwhelmed by it. You start to see that your ability to feel deeply, to perceive what others miss, to sense emotional undercurrents, these are strengths. They make you insightful, compassionate, capable of profound connection. But they're only strengths when you're not drowning in them, when you have the skills to stay grounded while feeling deeply, when you can be sensitive without being absorbed. That's what this work gives you, not the elimination of sensitivity, but the integration of it, the ability to be exactly who you are, deeply feeling, highly perceptive, emotionally attuned, while also remaining solid in yourself. You don't have to choose between being sensitive and being stable. You can be both. You don't have to choose between caring deeply and staying clear. You can do both. You don't have to choose between openness and boundaries. You can hold both. That's the integration. That's the goal. Not to become someone else, but to become more fully yourself. And from that place, grounded, clear, open, you can engage with life and with people in ways that are sustainable, meaningful, and real. You can love without losing yourself. You can care without carrying. You can feel deeply without being overwhelmed. You can be exactly who you've always been, just no longer at the mercy of everyone else's emotional weather. That's not becoming less sensitive, that's becoming sovereign, and it changes everything.
Conclusion. Coming home to yourself. If you've made it this far, you already know something has shifted. Maybe it's subtle, maybe it's just the beginning, but somewhere in the reading, in the recognition, in the quiet acknowledgement that what you've been experiencing is real, something has changed. You've started to see that emotional absorption isn't a character flaw, that your sensitivity isn't something to apologize for or fix, that the exhaustion you've been carrying isn't because you're weak or broken, but because you've been living without boundaries in a world that demands them. And now you know there's another way. This isn't the end of the work, it's the beginning, because knowing about emotional boundaries and actually living with them are two different things. You'll need to practice. You'll need to be patient with yourself. You'll need to return to these concepts again and again, especially on the days when absorption feels automatic and inevitable. But you have the tools now. You understand why your nervous system reads the room the way it does. You know the difference between empathy and fusion. You understand what boundaries actually are, not walls, but a way of staying yourself while staying connected. You know how to tell which emotions are yours. You know how to ground yourself in real time, how to clear what you've absorbed afterward, how to practice the inner no. You know how to rebuild your emotional center and how to stay open without losing yourself.
These aren't just concepts, they're practices, and practices require repetition, patience, grace. There will be days when you do everything right and still feel overwhelmed. Days when you absorb despite your best efforts. Days when you lose your center completely and can't find your way back until hours later. That's okay. That's not failure. That's what it looks like to be sensitive in a world full of emotion. The goal was never perfection. The goal was awareness, choice, the capacity to return to yourself after you've been pulled away. And that capacity grows stronger with time. Here's what you need to remember on the hard days. Your sensitivity is not a burden to overcome. It's a way of experiencing the world that has depth, richness, and value. It allows you to connect in ways that others can't. It gives you insight, compassion, perception. It makes you capable of profound intimacy and understanding. But it only becomes sustainable when you learn to hold it consciously, when you stop letting it run you and start working with it intentionally, when you honor it without being ruled by it. You're allowed to feel deeply and still belong to yourself. You're allowed to care about others without carrying their emotional weight. You're allowed to be sensitive and boundaried at the same time. These things are not in conflict. They support each other. Boundaries don't make you cold, they make genuine warmth possible. Because when you're not constantly drained, when you're not always in recovery mode, when you're not afraid of being absorbed, you can actually show up. You can be present. You can offer real care instead of just mirroring distress. This work is also an act of self-respect. It's saying quietly but firmly, I matter. My emotional state matters. My energy matters. I'm allowed to take up space in my own life. For many sensitive people, that's a radical statement. You've spent so much time making room for everyone else, attending to everyone else's needs, that the idea of prioritizing your own emotional well-being can feel selfish. But it's not selfish, it's necessary. Because you can't give from an empty place. You can't support others if you're constantly depleted. You can't be there for anyone, including yourself, if you're always dissolved into someone else's experience. Taking care of your own emotional boundaries is what makes it possible to care for others sustainably. It's not selfishness, it's sustainability. As you move forward from here, remember that this is ongoing work. There's no point at which you're done learning how to stay grounded, no moment when you've mastered boundaries so completely that you never need to think about them again. Life changes, relationships deepen or shift, new challenges emerge. And with each change, you'll need to return to these practices, to adjust, to recalibrate, to find your center again. But each time you do, it gets a little easier. Your system learns. It starts to trust that staying separate doesn't mean losing connection. It begins to recognize the signs of absorption sooner. It knows the way back home. And home is what this is really about. Not just having boundaries or managing absorption, but having a self to come home to, a sense of your own emotional ground that remains steady even when everything else is shifting. A place inside you that's yours alone, quiet, clear, unmoved by the storms passing through other people's lives. That place has always been there. You didn't lose it. You just lost access to it. And now you're finding your way back. This journey doesn't require you to become someone else. It doesn't ask you to shut down your sensitivity or harden yourself against the world. It simply asks you to stay found while moving through life, to remain yourself while caring for others, to be both open and intact. You can do this. You're already doing it just by being here, just by reading this, just by recognizing that something needs to change. The work ahead won't always be easy, but it's worth it. Because on the other side of this work is a life where you don't have to choose between caring and clarity, where you can be sensitive without being overwhelmed, where you can love deeply without losing yourself, where you can finally, fully belong to yourself and stay that way. You're not imagining what you've been experiencing. You're not too sensitive. You're not broken. You're just learning how to hold your sensitivity with consciousness instead of letting it hold you. And that changes everything. Welcome home. Epilogue. A quiet reminder. There will be a moment, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, when you forget everything you've learned here.
You'll walk into a room, absorb someone's anxiety, and spend the next 3 hours carrying it without realizing what happened. You'll leave a conversation feeling drained and wonder why you feel so terrible when nothing particularly bad occurred. In that moment, I want you to remember something simple. You can always come back. Coming back doesn't require perfect execution. It doesn't require you to never absorb, never merge, never lose yourself. It just requires you to notice, whenever you notice, that you've drifted away from your center and to gently guide yourself back. Feel your feet on the ground. Take one breath. Ask yourself, is this mine? That's all. That's the practice. Not perfection, just return. Your sensitivity is a gift, even on the days it doesn't feel like one, even on the days it feels like too much, like a burden, like something you wish you could turn off. It connects you to life in ways that matter. It makes you who you are. You don't need to change it. You just need to learn to live with it consciously. And you're learning. Every time you notice absorption happening, every time you choose not to merge, every time you clear what you've taken on, every time you come back to yourself, you're learning. Be patient, be gentle, keep returning. You're exactly where you need to be.